Hi, my name is Melissa Mann. I'm the site administrator here at Drakewell Museum and Park. Here we preserve and interpret the history of the modern petroleum industry and its growth into a global enterprise. The key feature of our site is Drake's Well. This well came in 1859. It was managed by Edwin L. Drake, who was sent by the Seneca Oil Company to drill for oil, the first time ever that oil was drilled. Oil had existed for thousands and thousands of years, had been used for medicines, for warfare, for building, construction, but had never really become its own industry. That came when there became a need in the late 19th century for an inexpensive light source. Many people have been using whale oil from the 1700s on to light their homes after dark. Sadly, though, the whales were being hunted to extinction, and that drove the cost of whale oil through the roof, which led people to start looking for a more inexpensive light source so that every person could have light after dark. There was a gentleman named Samuel Keir from Pittsburgh who was an entrepreneur, and he developed a way to distill crude oil into a cheap form of lighting called kerosene. That created a demand for oil. And because of that, Drake was sent to the Oil Creek area just outside of Titusville, Pennsylvania, where he drilled his well in 1859 and launched an industry.
My name is Bill Stump, and I am one of the replica operators and site interpreters here at Drake Well. And where we are is one of the most important spots in American history. We're standing on the exact spot where Colonel Drake and Uncle Billy Smith drilled the first oil well back in 1859. The building that we're in is an exact board-for-board replica of the engine house, which is this part, and the derrick, which is the tall tower part at the far end. This was built in 1945, and it is board-for-board based on the photographs that were taken by John Mather, who was the oil photographer of the time. And every board here has a specific size and a number based on those photographs. The machinery that you see are exact replicas of the steam engine and boiler that Colonel Drake used to actually do the drilling. It is a 6.5 horsepower steam engine powered by a 500-gallon water boiler, which is wood-fired. What he bought was an 1847 steamboat engine from a company in Erie that made steamers for the Great Lakes. He had it shipped down here. They sold him an 1847 engine with an 1855 boiler for $500, which would be about $20,000 in today's money. The boiler is called a long john, and it goes the entire length of the brick wall behind me. And as I said, it is wood-fired. Basically, a steam engine is nothing more than a tea kettle. The fire boils the water to steam comes up through the dome, down through the pipe, and into the engine. This black and silver cylinder and chest is the entire engine. It's a 6.5 horsepower, and what that means is it's about half the size of a riding lawnmower. But the whole purpose of the engine was to keep the flywheel going. The big green wheel that you see weighs 907 pounds, almost half a ton. The purpose of the flywheel, because the well was pounded down, this was not drilled rotary. What they needed was a constant up and down motion. And so the engine pushes on the connecting rod, which spins the flywheel, which makes the pitman arm go up and down, which sets the walking beam seesawing up and down. And that seesawing motion is what drilled the well, and then once they struck oil, it's the same motion that was used to pump the well. One of the problems with steam engines was the fact that they were very unpredictable and erratic. They would just suddenly speed up, and they would run so hard and fast they could actually pound themselves apart. But one of the features found on the steam engine are those spinning balls on top called a fly ball governor. A governor governs or determines how fast an engine will be allowed to run. They spin at the same speed the engine's going based on that leather belt which goes around the flywheel. If the engine happens to speed up, they're going to speed up. Centrifugal force is going to cause them to fly out. That's why it's called a fly ball governor. As they fly out, they move up the spindle, and in the process they press down on a secondary valve and it actually cuts back the steam. So it prevents the engine from going too fast, gives you a top speed which is safe, but it also acts as cruise control because I'm standing here and it's operating by itself over there. When they were drilling the well was pounded down, or what they call percussion. They raised and lowered a very heavy metal chisel bit. Now this is a scale model of what they used, but actually it was just a flat pointed chisel which was raised and dropped based on the up and down action of the walking beam. The actual string of tools was probably 20 to 25 foot tall, which is one of the reasons that the derrick had to be so tall. The derrick had to be tall enough so that whatever you had down in the well could be raised up and swung out of the way, especially when they had to sharpen the bit. So you had your bit, your drill stem, which was extremely heavy, and then on top you had a set what was called jars. These are rods that slide inside each other. The purpose of this was to kind of cushion the impact so that the bit didn't break because it was made out of cast iron, but it also gave a second impact. As this was dropped, it would hit, and then this would give a second impact, and then it would loosen the bit to be able to be pulled back out. This is where they get the expression to jar something loose. The jar rig loosened the bit so that they could raise and they could drop it. Now, one of the problems with Drake's well was the fact that we were right on the water table here, and he couldn't get below 18 feet without the hole filling with water and collapsing. They drilled unsuccessfully for many, many weeks before Drake got the idea of driving metal pipe down in the ground, down to bedrock. That kept the hole from collapsing and made the well successful. Unfortunately, he never patented that process. Had he done that, he would have been a multimillionaire instead of ending in poverty as he did, because that's the first step in drilling any well. Even nowadays, they drive a pipe in the ground and start from that. The spot you're looking at right now is the actual hole, the actual well drilled by Colonel Drake and Uncle Billy Smith. 69.5 feet down, and if he hadn't drilled right there, he would have missed, because that spot is the only spot in this entire valley where you find oil at 69.5 feet. Had he drilled any distance to the side, he would have missed. But it was an educated guess. This area was well known for the oil seeps that were here, and there was an actual oil seep right there at that spot. So he knew it was a good spot, he just didn't know how deep he was going to have to go. He said in his journal he was prepared to go down 1,000 feet, which was a testament to his determination more than anything else. And then he struck at 69.5 and didn't have any barrels because they didn't have oil barrels. There wasn't the need for them. So he was filling up his wife's wash tub with the oil, and she wasn't too happy about that idea. The only barrels available were at the breweries, so he went into Titusville and Meadville, got every beer and whiskey keg he could find, and that's what these smaller barrels are, and that's what they shipped the first oil in until the coopering or barrel industry took off here. And they went to a standard barrel, which are the large barrels you see in the corner. That's a 42-gallon barrel, and that is still the standard today. When they talk about a barrel of oil, it's 42-gallon. Even though we put it in a 55-gallon drum, 42-gallon is a barrel. The oil you see coming out of the pipe is actual Pennsylvania-grade crude oil. This is what it looks like, smells like, and tastes like, because they did drink it for medicine in the early days. They claimed it cured everything: baldness, blindness, headaches, hangovers, hiccups, you name it. One of the things it does do is a teaspoon of that keeps you running smooth all day long. It's very watery, very thin. It's what they call light sweet crude. Light because it is so thin and watery, and sweet because it has very little sulfur in it. The lighter the oil, the sweeter the oil, the easier it refines. And so when they talk about the price of a barrel of oil on the market, it's based on light sweet crude, which is what Pennsylvania crude is.
So one of our main focuses here at the museum, of course, is Edwin L. Drake, because he's the hero of our story here. And Edwin Drake, he wasn't in the oil industry before he came. You know, he didn't drill oil or drill wells. He didn't own property where there had been oil. Actually, he was a railroad conductor on the railroad, but unfortunately, he developed an illness that forced him to retire from the railroad in 1857. And he was in New Hampshire, doing odd jobs when he was approached by the Seneca Oil Company. And they enjoyed him because he had an entrepreneurial spirit. He was an intelligent man, but most of all, he had a railroad pass. He could, because he had been a conductor, go anywhere on any railroads for free. So they sent him to Titusville in 1858 to scout out a location and get an idea for drilling the well, drilling a commercial oil well that they had in mind. So Drake was basically a project manager in the well that launched an industry. He came here, he talked to folks in Titusville and around town, told them what he was going to do, and they called it Drake's Folly. They made fun of him. You didn't drill for oil. Oil seeped up out of the ground naturally. It wasn't something that you purposely went out and drilled for and put your energy into getting. But he was sure that this could be done. So he told the company, the folks back in New Haven, that he could get this done. He went out, hired, searched for somebody who knew about drilling, ended up in Tarentum, where he found a driller in Uncle Billy Smith. Billy Smith had been drilling saltwater wells. And so they took that technology from salt well drilling and applied it to drilling an oil well. Now, Drake is most well known for drilling the well, of course, but a little known fact is that he actually developed the idea for the drive pipe, which every well that's drilled today has a drive pipe. Because the water table was so shallow here in the Oil Creek Valley, water kept flooding the well when they were drilling. And to counteract that problem, he thought, why don't we put a pipe in the ground and then drill inside that? That will keep the water out of our pipe. Unfortunately, Drake did not patent his project or his creation. So he didn't make any money off this thing that we still use over 150 years later. Unfortunately, Drake was not paid by the company. Even though we think of the oil industry today as something that makes people wealthy, and in that time period made people wealthy, Drake did not get wealthy by drilling the first commercial oil well. He actually, when he passed away, he was penniless, and it's actually kind of a tragic story for somebody who created something that touches our lives in so many ways even today. One of the most interesting stories in oil history, early oil history, is secondary recovery and the efforts to make wells produce more. Pennsylvania grade crude oil, is paraffin based, which means that it has a high wax content. So over time, when wells first come in, they flow pretty well. But most Pennsylvania wells do require pumping in order for the oil to be brought to the surface. But over time, while wells and pumping jacks are pumping, that wax starts building up, and eventually it clogs the well so that there's very little production, and production decreases greatly. And this started almost immediately in the 1860s, after Drake's well comes in. Up and down the valley, people are putting in oil wells, and they're finding oil only to have their wells start to decrease in production. So people are trying to figure out a way to fix that. And a man named Colonel Roberts, who had been in the Civil War, patented what he called nitroglycerin shooting. And basically what that was he had seen during the Civil War torpedoes that were underwater, and when they exploded, that water forced the blast down first and then up. And he thought that that could be used in oil wells as well. So what they would do is fill a nitro torpedo, send it down into the well, put a blasting cap on top, fill it with water, nitro, blasting cap on top, send it down the well, and then what they would do is take this big heavy metal object called a go devil, and they would drop the go devil down towards that blasting cap. And it was called a go devil because once you dropped it, you had to go like the devil, or you were in fear of your life getting blown up with the rest of the well. And so down went the go devil. When it hit that blasting cap, the pressure would first be forced down by the water and then up and out of the well, incinerating all of that wax, cracking some of the rock surface underground, and oil started flowing again so that people could keep pumping their wells and oil production would go up again. One of the interesting things that we're able to show here at Drake Well using our artifact collection is the evolution of drilling oil wells. When it first started, when Drake comes and he drills his oil well, what they're using, the methods that they're using came from salt well drilling. And they took the practice, the form of drilling that they were using, the tools that they were using, and they applied them to drilling oil wells. And basically what they were doing was what we call percussion drilling, where they took a very large and heavy bit that a blacksmith would sharpen, forge and then sharpen, and then basically it's just like it sounds. They would drop that bit in, and the way that the engine or whatever was powering, sometimes it was manpower that was powering that drill bit, would drop the bit and it would hit against the rock that was down in the well. And that was called percussion. Now, when that drill bit would eventually, after hours and hours of being dropped against rock would dull, they would pull up all the tools, they would pull up the bit, and your toolie or your blacksmith who was there on site would then resharpen the bit and work that out, while your roustabouts would then bale all of the chips of rock and things that were in the well that were in the way. They would use the baler to bail all of that out while he was fixing that tool. And then they would go right back to it. Bit goes back in with the string of tools, and they would start either through manpower, as I said, or with an engine, drilling again. Now, at the turn of the century, the 20th century, when the industry has really moved more towards Texas as its center, you have Spindletop, which comes in and really a huge flowing well in Texas and opens the Texas and Oklahoma oil fields. They use rotary drilling. And basically what happens is that you've got a bit in the ground that is rotated on the stem of which is rotated on the floor of the derrick. So you've got a table that turns, and it turns the bit in a rotation, and it grinds through the rock that's there. We use this method today, 150 years later, because it's much more efficient than the percussion drilling of the early 1860s. Another challenge that the early oil industry faced was transporting the oil from the well site to the refineries, which were early on in Pittsburgh. This was a real challenge because in Titusville at that time, in the time of Drake's Well, there were no railroads in this region. There were very few roads. It was very difficult for people to get around. But it was, pointless if, getting the oil out of the ground was pointless unless you could get it to the refinery in order for it to be made, distilled into kerosene. That's where, the process made money. So they had to be creative. At first, oil was taken from the well in barrels on horse-drawn wagons. Now, this was not at all the most efficient way because, as I said, there were very few roads. We're talking the backwoods of Venango County, Pennsylvania. It was very bumpy, uphill, downhill, and it was difficult. And what added to the problem was that early barrels leaked. So as they're going over these bumps, they're leaking oil all over their makeshift roads, and it's creating this nasty mud. And so it gets to be, people start traveling the same routes. They're leaking oil all over the place, creating these trenches of mud, where wagons then start to get bogged down and stuck, and animals, the horses are, up to their haunches in mud, and it's just slowing down the process even more. But what they're really trying to accomplish then is to get the barrels to a waterway. And that waterway here is Oil Creek. Now, Oil Creek is notoriously shallow. It's always been very shallow. So how are you going to float those barrels down this very shallow creek? What they used was shallow longboats, and they would stack these longboats up with hundreds and hundreds of barrels full of oil. So they're very heavy. Now, the only way for them to get these boats down Oil Creek to where it meets up with the Allegheny River in Oil City is what we call a pond freshet. And they took this method from the lumber industry here in the valley. And basically what they would do is create a flood on Oil Creek. They would, all at the same time, all the mill owners up and down Oil Creek would dam up the water. And they would say on Saturday, at 1 o'clock, have your boats prepped and ready. We're going to release all of the dams at one time, and they would do that. So at noon, they would cut the dams loose, and this tidal wave of water would come rolling down Oil Creek. Also, not the most efficient way to move your oil, because this is extremely dangerous. You've got tons and tons of weight and people who are trying to guide, one man or two men who are trying to guide these longboats on this tidal wave of water with a pole down Oil Creek. So they would all fly down. You would have boats careening into each other, and then once they get to Oil City, they have to deal with the bridges that are spanning the Oil Creek. So they have to dodge abutments and different things like that, the obstacles that are in their way. And a lot of times it created accidents. This was really, the pond freshet was a spectator sport in the early oil industry. That would be in the paper that it was going to happen, and people would line up and down the creek to watch the spectacle of transporting oil to the Allegheny River so that it then could be transported by steamboat down to Pittsburgh for refining. After that, they used that method for into the 1860s until the railroads come down from Erie into the oil region, and then a safer form of transporting that oil via the railroad is an option, and the pond freshet falls out of a method that they use. Our exhibit also looks at the evolution of the refining process, because really refining is a really important part of this story, because without it, without Samuel Keir coming in and first distilling crude oil into that inexpensive light source of kerosene, oil's worthless for the most part. It's this foul smelling byproduct of salt well drilling that we have no use for. But Keir comes in, figures out how to distill it, uses first a 1 barrel still and then up to a 5 barrel still in Pittsburgh, and finds that inexpensive light source. Now, over the years, then there's an evolution in refining as well. Now, what happens towards the turn of the 20th century when the electric light bulb comes into fashion, and it's an even less expensive, more efficient lighting source than kerosene? Does the oil industry say, well, there's nothing more for us to do here? No, absolutely not. They're always looking for that next product. How can we use crude oil to make lives better? And what comes about is the combustion engine. So automobiles. So what do we need out of crude oil? We need it to be, we need to be able to distill crude oil for gasoline. Now, when Keir in the 1859, 1860s is distilling for kerosene, he's getting gasoline, but he's throwing it away. It's a nasty byproduct that he can't use. But now we see a use for this byproduct. So what we try to look at here is that early distillation process, but also look at modern refining and how, when we heat up crude oil to its highest temperatures and it vaporizes, when it cools down through the cracking tower, all of the different products that come out of the refining process, whether that be gasoline or asphalt or naphthas, it's looking at that process and how it has evolved over 150 years and how we now have more products than Keir could have possibly imagined when he first refined crude oil. We're very lucky here at Drakewell Museum because we're telling the story of an industry that is still very much alive and well. It has been over 150 years since Drake struck oil and launched this industry. And through that 150 years, to this day, our modern society is saturated in oil. There's a drop of oil and natural gas in our lives every day. And that really shows in the collection of artifacts that we have that show the uses over time of crude oil. And as we have said, the very first uses were for kerosene and that inexpensive lamp oil, up to today where we're using oil for to fuel our cars and our airplanes, also for our makeup and our medicines and plastics, which revolutionized our world economy. So there's 8,000 products in your home alone that are created from crude oil. And we're very pleased to be able to show that. And that's probably one of the most important points that we want folks to take away from their visit to Drakewell Museum, is just how important oil and natural gas are in their everyday lives. Thank you for coming on the tour today. I've really enjoyed sharing the story of the birth of the modern petroleum industry with you. It's a story of ingenuity and perseverance and innovation, and we hope that you'll come and see all of the artifacts that really bring that story to life here at Drakewell Museum and Park. Please visit our website for more information. It's www.drakewell.org.